So I see we are live. So everybody, how you guys doing? If you are watching this in the replay afterwards, then click below to see what the timestamps of the questions are, and you will see me just click those timestamps if it's on YouTube, and you'll see me answer those questions. But otherwise, I want to go through whatever questions I can for you guys today and see how I can help you. So I could see we're connected on Facebook and on YouTube, so you guys can hit me with that, with any questions on your mind. And moderating today we have Holly. So Holly will be jumping in and answering questions ahead of time. Today it's just language encouragement. Whatever questions you happen to have on your mind, I'll see them coming up very quickly, but Holly's going to help me out picking the particular questions that I know we're going to tackle first. I'm going to try and get through as many as I can. So a quick hello to everybody. Let's see, we got Jonathan, we got some people in Mexico here on YouTube. I just saw people learning all sorts of languages. But let's see, I want to jump straight into the first question that and I'm also on Periscope, by the way. Anyone watching this on Twitter, just share your questions, and Holly will be sharing the questions that I don't happen to see, but I'll try to get through as many as I can. So first question is from Jonathan. He's got a question about Egyptian Arabic over on Facebook. He says, can you recommend a textbook with lots of dialogue and audio for Egyptian Arabic? So I remember that when I was learning this, what I used mostly myself was the my teachers on italki, because having a good textbook that's based off Egyptian Arabic is a little harder. But if you go to the website, I think it's Lisan Master, something like that. It's got like a good dictionary, but I would work off your teachers for that. If anyone else has tips specifically for Egyptian Arabic, then make sure you share that with us here. So everyone, you're welcome to jump in and answer some of these questions yourself, but I'm going to try my best and answer whichever ones that I happen to be able to hit here. Okay, so what else can I answer for you guys? Catching up with everything here. All right, so back over on Facebook, we have Mandy, and Mandy Monroe says, how do you juggle learning multiple languages? Do you set aside specific days? How do you allocate time to each language to maintain skill and still learn to speak better? Okay, good question. I do get this question quite frequently. Essentially, I don't ever try to intensively improve one language while maintaining my other languages. So what I would do, Mandy, is I would be listening to the issues that I'd have with some like languages that I'm learning at the same time and try to work on those. So if I'm maintaining multiple languages at once, then I would do it an entire day if possible, because I find it's more work for my brain to be able to switch between these languages if I'm doing it for like 1 hour and then another hour for another language. So I would recommend you have one day for one language if you're working on maintaining multiple languages. But if you want to genuinely speak them better, then I would switch away from that, and I would decide that you're going to put those languages on pause and you're going to intensively improve one language and bring it up a notch, like up one of the CEFRL levels, for instance. So that's kind of what I would recommend. Either focus on one to intensively improve it, or be maintaining multiple languages with a different language every day as your core focus. Okay? All right. So let's see what else we got here on our questions. David back on Facebook says, any specific recommendations for learning Korean? I haven't learned Korean myself, so I would love to hear what people think about that. But I know my friend Scott Young, he did dive into Korean, and he had a very similar process that I've implemented in my language learning missions of speaking as much as you can from the start. And with Korean, because its alphabet is phonetic, I would try to learn that as quickly as possible so you can see words written in Korean and kind of get used to them in that way. Whereas that's a little trickier with Chinese and Japanese. Generally with those, I would learn the phonetic equivalent. So with Chinese, I'd learn through pinyin for the first few months at least. And for Japanese, I'd use hiragana or katakana, but not the actual characters. But with Korean, you don't have to worry about that because the actual writing system is one of the most logical writing systems in the world. You can learn it very quickly, actually. So I would try to learn that system, but then otherwise keep speaking, keep getting lessons with people, and see what you can do from that. Okay? Let's see. So back on YouTube, Morgan says, what do you think about using text with accents for learning Russian? I've heard that it actually hinders the learning process in the long run and that it's better not to use them. Text with accents, I'm not sure what you mean by that, especially because I'm not familiar with Cyrillic directly, so I can't tell you if having accents or not having accents works. But if it's something like, I know for instance Arabic, they add accents for learners, and I think that's fine. Like it helps you know which vowels to use because that's not implemented as part of the script. So I would try to kind of consider that. If you are learning, it's fine to do that as a beginner, but you want to get out of that. Like consider that as like your stabilizers to kind of, if you're learning how to ride a bike, that it'll help you a little bit to reduce how wobbly you'll be at the start, but you want to get to the natural use. But again, I don't know if that's relevant to Russian. Somebody else can maybe jump in and give us an idea of that. Okay. All right. Rasmus over on Facebook, he asked, hello, Benny. I want to move and study in another country in 2 years' time. And the problem is I'm not sure which country it's going to be. So I'd need to reach a level good enough for studying at university. How would you go about this? Do you stick to your common advice for reaching B2 before moving on to the next? Okay, so if you want to study in university, I know that a lot of European universities do have a minimum requirement of either B2 or C1. So you need to, essentially your whole learning process has to be towards passing that exam, because passing that exam will by default allow you to enter the university if you pass the other criteria, obviously. So what I would say is to do what I recommend to get to level B1, which is focus on speaking. Try to get lots of spoken practice, get used to the language, have fun with it, be familiar with the sounds by practicing listening, but really listening to audio and that kind of level of interaction while being okay with making mistakes. And then once you've passed that B1 and you're getting to the B2, I would start like using grammar books, studying it intensively, and actually trying to sit the B2 exam and then the C1 exam if that's the one you happen to need to enter university. It's a very long process. You're not going to do this in the space of a few months. It's going to, with the summer coming up, you could potentially have like a B1, maybe a B2 end goal if you're doing it like full time, depending on your background, the language and so on. But it's totally feasible if your university goal is a couple of years off to get up to that level. So that's what I would recommend for that. Okay. Then Holly tells me that Edward of Wales over on YouTube is asking, is it possible to learn Japanese completely free, or any language for that matter? Edward, yes it is. In fact, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Duolingo just added Japanese as one of their languages, which is great because they didn't have a lot of Asian languages yet. So Duolingo will help you learn it for free, at least for the moment, and unless they change their business model sometime soon. You would be able to use that. Otherwise, there's tons of resources. When I was learning Japanese, I used the Memrise as well. They had lots of great little mnemonics and other cards that you could help kind of build into it. And if you can't afford to get a private teacher, then still go on a site like italki and HelloTalk and all these other like communities and find someone to have some kind of a language exchange with. And that way you help them learn English, presumably, and they'll help you learn Japanese. Because that spoken practice, if your goal is spoken, obviously there are people here who may not have as much of an interest in improving their spoken level of a language. But if that is one of your interests, then you want to get on top of that immediately. And loads of websites you can watch, you can read and flick through in Japanese and in any language. You can listen to it for free by checking out streamed radio. One I happen to like is Tune In, because it's an app that has a good directory that includes the country, so you would pick Japanese in your case. And tons of other apps and games and decks you can download into Anki. Articles you could try to read in parallel on Wikipedia by clicking the language option once your level is good enough for reading, obviously. So there are definitely tons of ways. So I would try to learn the language even if you feel you can't afford it. You can get into it right now. What I would only say is having the extra budget gives you a bit more flexibility. I personally like having a one-on-one teacher, but if you're flexible and imaginative enough, you can definitely find ways to improve your language skills without spending a penny. So, absolutely. And Jonathan on Facebook had asked, at what point or level can you include a language on a job application? This is a funny question because before I truly got into languages, I included languages on my CV, my resume, as they say here over in America, and it was a little too optimistic of me. I had just learned some in school and I put level okay, which meant nothing. You know, there was no European grading system. So a lot of people do that. The gentle sounds of New York behind me. A lot of people do that, and I would put your language on your resume for your job application regardless. What I would try to do, though, is I would try to be straightforward about what your level is. So again, European Common Framework, do a search for that if you're not familiar with it, and that'll show you the 6 language levels. Generally, I would just put what level you are based on that scale on your job applications, because even a basic level, if you're honest about it, that could still be useful. You know, I had a basic level when I worked as a youth hostel receptionist. I had a basic level in Spanish and Italian, and I had started to learn a little French ahead of a trip to France coming up, and I was not able to have casual conversations, but that basic level, that was actually a pro for me in getting the job, because I just needed to be able to check people into the hostel, and that's all they needed, and they were happy with that. So, you know, be honest about your level, but absolutely include it. Even if your level is only an A1, the lowest level on that scale, you would still be able to include it if you are confident it is at that level. Okay? French Wolf on YouTube asks, is taking a language class easier than learning by yourself? Yes, actually, French Wolf, I would say taking a language class is easier than learning by yourself. But what you need to think about here is something that's easier better? So whenever I talk about different methods of language learning, for me, the priority is never what's easiest. And I feel that whatever is going to be easiest on you, that makes you feel like you haven't put in that much of an effort, you don't feel as exhausted at the end, you have the maximum fun or leisure with it. I don't think that that's pushing you enough. I don't think that that is truly getting you to the limits of what you can possibly learn in that session. And I find that a lot of language courses tend to be marketed for the easy way to learn a language, and technically they might achieve that. Like, I'm a critic of Rosetta Stone, and I think that they are being honest when they say they are the easy way to learn a language, but they're not the practical way. They're not the useful way. They're not the quick way. They're not the efficient way to learn a language. But it is very easy to sit back and just click buttons. You know, that's super easy. It doesn't involve a lot of brain power. So I would definitely not focus on what's easier. So with that in mind, a language class is easier than learning by yourself, because in a class, there's a group of other people the teacher has to interact with. And the teacher, if it's a traditional learning class, then the teacher is kind of talking at you about, here's how the grammar works, here's how the vocab works. There are a lot of excellent teachers that don't do this, and their role is more of like language facilitator, where they interact with their students, which is amazing. That's what I always try to find. But if you have the more traditional teaching style, that's very easy on you, because you don't really have to do anything. You just sit there and let the teacher tell you what you have for homework or whatever it is. But it's harder if you are taking the initiative and trying to find people to speak to and trying to find the right courses and doing things like that. It's going to feel like your brain is melting when you're doing it right. So I would actually not try to see what's easier and try to see what's better, what gives you better results. Okay? So let me see, flicking through other questions that I happen to not see as I was talking there. French Wolf also asked, what's the difference between French in Canada and French in France? There's a lot of accent differences, a few word differences. One thing I always find funny is how they curse is different, because they use like church religious words like chalice, and that's like a curse in Quebec. But otherwise, there's a great book that if you look it up, Le Québécois en 10 leçons, the Quebec in 10 lessons, or search my blog. There's some guest posts about Quebec French. You'll see a more kind of detailed look at how it's different. But ultimately, the standard French, whenever I think of Quebec French, I imagine how it's spoken on the street. But the standard French that you would use to get jobs and such, it's still acceptable to base Parisian French off what you're doing for that. The same way it would be if you were going to Ireland and you are coming from Europe, you're likely to have learned British English. And it's fine if you're looking for a job with a very good level of British English, even in Ireland. So I kind of think of it like that. So I wouldn't worry too much about those kind of things. Generally, when it comes to dialects, I try to learn whatever the standard version is first, and then improve my dialect skills a little bit after that. Okay. All right. Flicking through some of these questions here. So Jamima on YouTube asked, Buenas noches aquí en España. Any ideas on how to increase your level from B2 to C1? I'm trying to increase vocabulary for more complex things like art, food, technology, politics, economy. Very good. So for this, I personally found it easiest to, like I had mentioned previously, to look for a C1 exam and try to pass that exam and sit the test, even if you're doing a mock version of that exam. The things that you would need to learn to pass it are the things that will get you to that level, even if you never plan to take the exam. So for people who are like, I don't want to spend €200 or €300 on that, then I would still look for the mock exams to try to learn them. But otherwise, those topics you selected, art, food, technology, politics, economy, I would try to redirect your learning such that they're about those things. So maybe subscribe to a food magazine in Spanish, or try to listen to a politics podcast in Spanish, and try to have sessions with a teacher or a language exchange partner where you debate things, like debate what's good for the economy. So I would try to really make those themes core to your language learning process, and you're going to start to see gaps. You're going to see what are the words you don't know, and they'll come up in conversation and you'll take note of them. And a lot of good courses might go in that direction. I know the Language Pod series tends to be very good on that. If you search my blog for Spanish podcasts or podcasts in general, you'll see the list of the podcasts I recommend. And one of my favorites, they tend to have these themes, so you can actually find technology discussions ahead of time and look into those. So it's something to consider. All right, and then let's see, Holly told me that Diana over on YouTube is asking, for Spanish, how do you know the difference between using por and para? And You also asked where to take the CEFRL test online. Okay, so por and para is a complex thing. I think that like a million blog posts would probably explain it better than I would in a very quick video like this. But generally, I would. I think the easiest way that really made a difference for me was learning them in context. Because if I explain, you use por in this situation, this situation, this situation, and para in that situation, and so on, then that's fine, but that's not going to really like click in your brain necessarily. So what I tend to do with those kind of words is learn them in the right context, and you'll see that if you say por in whatever phrase, like I don't know, por ejemplo means for example. So I wouldn't try to understand the logic of why it's not para ejemplo. I wouldn't try to do that. I would just learn the phrase itself, and you don't have to do this for a million phrases. You start to see the pattern and there's the logic there. The logic essentially is that if you think about like the direction, and the por kind of implies that it's caused by something, and I think that the for example is because the example is coming from rather than directed to, and it's very hard to like express this in a very concise way. So try to see them in context, and otherwise do try to read blog posts, like search for the differences. Any good grammar books will explain what the like with lots of examples as well, and they can help you. So there's loads of ways you can do that, but I would try through the examples mostly. Okay, and in terms of taking the CEFRL test online, you can't take it online such that it's recognized, like in the case of Spanish, recognized by the Instituto Cervantes, but you can find tests that you can download just for your own purposes. So you wouldn't pass the exam, but you would be able to like see what the test is like, and maybe if it comes with an answer key to try to see if you can answer things and know what your level would be. But ultimately, what you should do is go to the school that tests them. So for Spanish, like I said, Instituto Cervantes. For French, the Alliance Française. For German, it's the Goethe Institute. For Italian, I think it's the University of Perugia. But you find whatever these particular schools are, and then type in the name of the exam, which will be on the Wikipedia CEFRL page if you find it. And then download and give it a whirl. And I would go through that with your teacher if you can. Okay, so let's see. Red Rosie asked over on YouTube, does watching subtitled films and shows work for learning languages? Oh yeah, sorry. Does watching subtitled films and shows work for learning languages? Yes, they do. However, I would highly recommend that those subtitles be in that language. So one of the things that helped me a ton when I was learning Spanish is I would turn on Antena Tres in the afternoon, and I would start watching Los Simpson, which I happened to have already seen in English. Now, that's not an ideal situation because it's translated. The culture in the show is American, so it's not the best way to really understand how Spanish is used. But for my cases, for my situation, it was actually very useful because I knew what they were saying already from the original in English that I'd seen several times. And I was like, so that's how they say eat my shorts in Spanish, which is not a direct translation, by the way. I won't say it in case there are any children in Spain watching. But there's you see those phrases, you see how it's used, but by having the subtitles in that language, you start to associate the sounds with the actual words that you see. Because something I'm sure a lot of people here can relate to is that you can read a language. You can understand it when it's on a page, but when someone speaks it to you, it sounds just too hard. They speak too fast. It's hard to keep up. You don't really know how to process that. So I find the subtitles in that language, in my case, hearing them speak Spanish and seeing the words in Spanish helped me to make that connection, and I would see how something is pronounced. Even for a phonetic language like Spanish, it was still a learning process. So I would absolutely have the subtitles, but I would have them in the target language, because I personally found that when I have put the captions on in English, then my focus just ends up reading the English, and I tune out the target language. Just recently if anyone's got a Netflix and you're learning Portuguese, I really enjoyed the show 3%, and this was like a show for Netflix, exclusively Netflix, recorded by Brazilians, and it was in Portuguese, but I had the subtitles on, just that I had them on in Portuguese, and that way I could see words that I didn't understand, and I could figure out what their use was in that context, whereas if I was trying to just get them from the translations, it wouldn't have worked. So that's what I would say. Okay, so let's see. Moving on with these other questions. Referring to something I had said earlier, Jonathan asked how do you differentiate between maintaining and expanding languages? If I wasn't clear, when I'm maintaining a language, I'm essentially making sure I'm getting practice. I'm making sure I'm using that language, but I'm aware that the kind of work I'm putting in is only really making it solid at the level it's currently at, and I'm not going to push it up a level. Whereas when I'm trying to expand my language skills, then for that it's more intensive, and rather than making sure I'm able to use it at that level, I'm generally trying to push myself up to the next level. And I can't personally, maybe other people can, but I can't personally do both maintaining multiple languages and improving the skills in one language. So that's kind of explaining that, if it makes any sense. Okay. Let's see what else I've got here. Daryl said he likes this background better than the last live video. I'm glad to hear that. You can see I'm making it prettier with all of the things over here, and having the chats visible so everybody knows they are being seen and coming up. Even if you say really dumb things, you're going to be here. And that's just like frozen on YouTube forever. That someone is like, Benny, take a shower. I'm so sorry that I smell that bad that you can see me from there. So sorry about that. Okay. So, let's see. French Wolf asked, are you friends with Tim Donner? I am friendly with him. I wouldn't say we're like close friends, but I will say that the first time that I was in New York as like an adult in these years, I was in New York when I was like 18, but I hadn't come back until 3 years ago, I think it was. The first person I saw was Tim Donner, and he hung out with me for the day. He brought me to a bookshop, and his favorite bookshop, which I always recommend people to now. And he gave me loads of tips because I was about to move to New York, and I really appreciated that. And we've been in touch, and obviously when I was doing the Skype Me Maybe video, he's like the first person that I contacted, and I was so eager to make sure he was in it. But yeah, since I got to New York, I've been very bad with managing my time, because as soon as I got here, I was just writing the language hacking books, so I haven't been out and about as much as I want to. I'm going to try and change that this year, and definitely see if Tim's about, and see if we can hang out, and maybe I'll bring him to the YouTube space and record a video with him. Okay. So, let's see. Seri Carter says, apart from your language hacking book, are there any good textbooks to learn Spanish that you highly recommend to use? It would depend on your level. If you see a previous video that I did where I gave a tour of my language learning library, if your level is at B1, B2, and you're ready to really kind of solidify it, and especially if you're trying to do the exams that I was mentioning previously, then I would recommend Harrop's Spanish Grammar. I find that book explains the grammar in the most comprehensive way. It's not a fun book, there's no pictures, but if your level is good, I would use that. If you're a beginner, by no means don't even think about getting that book, because it will just completely put you off the language. seeing all of those rules explained like that. So that's the main one I'd recommend. Otherwise, if you're sitting the C2 exam, I don't know if they still print it, but the book I happened to use was called El Cronometro. I don't know if I'm getting the syllable stress right on that one, but the chronometer course to help get into that language that's what I would recommend. But otherwise, it really depends what you want to do in the language. What skills do you want to improve? How do you enjoy using the language? Like, I never used comic books when I was learning Spanish, and in retrospect, I kind of should have, especially as a beginner, because the books I did try to use as a beginner were not good books. For my level, I tried to learn through Lord of the Rings as an absolute beginner. It's the dumbest idea I ever had. Whereas I should have picked up a good comic book and seen the visuals helping me through context while also seeing the words. So if you're into that, give it a try. I've also had good use out of getting magazines about technology, because I like reading magazines about technology in English. So I've read them in my target language, and even though it's more advanced vocabulary, they tend to be very similar, these engineering terms, across European languages anyway, or Romance languages, I should say. Okay, so so those are just a couple of examples, but I would try to see based on your interest, and that'll give you a better idea. Okay, so Carlos Conde on YouTube asks, is Tagalog hard to learn? Tagalog was a fun language. I actually I got an email exchange with Tim Ferriss when he was trying to learn Tagalog, and I gave him advice for a TV show he was trying to get ready to appear on in Tagalog. And a very interesting thing about that language is it's like it's split in three in terms of the vocabulary, for sure, where you have a third of the vocabulary is Spanish, and you will recognize a lot of those words, and that tends to be pretty consistently. If you imagine when Magellan, however you pronounce his name, had arrived in the Philippines, in that part of the world, and brought European culture, the kind of things he would have introduced at that time would tend to be the words in Tagalog that are from Spanish. So the word for shoe is zapato, and a lot of religious terms. So you have God is Dios, and so on. Anything religious is going to be from Spanish. And then so that's one third. The other third is English. Tagalog has tons of English words, which is essentially anything related to technology, anything in the last 100 years, because of the American influence, of course. So you can very quickly guess ahead of time what the word's going to be. And if you know Spanish and English, you're going to have a big heads up. And then the last third would be native Tagalog words. And I just found it just so fascinating to learn. I would highly recommend people give it a whirl. Okay, so Ukulele N64 asks over on YouTube, do you still study Mandarin, Benny? Very good question, and yes, I do still study it. That is one of the languages that I'm trying to first make sure that the level it's currently at, which is kind of a Swiss cheese version of A2 at this stage. I used to get it to, when I had my original project, I got it to kind of like a pretty good B1 spoken, definitely not written or reading, but a good spoken B1 level. Now it's a kind of insecure, unbalanced A2. So I've been trying to get back into that, and I've been using books to remind myself how the language works, easing myself back in, and I haven't been doing the level of maintenance that I actually like to do. So I am trying to restart that properly, such that every week I'll have at least 2 spoken sessions with a Chinese teacher via Skype, and that before those sessions I'm doing intensive learning, whether that's using my my books or if it's listening to podcasts and so on. So that's kind of what I would say in terms of if I'm still studying Mandarin, I am still studying it, but not at the level of intensity that I need to be able to maintain it. And now that the language hacking books are behind me and I'm trying to get on top of this year from the resulting backlog that I had from last year. I'm trying to get back into proper maintenance mode, and Mandarin is going to be one of the highest priorities. So, hope that answers that question. All right. So, let's see what else we got. Nathan says, Nathan's question is, will you ever attempt to understand Scottish people? That's a very funny question, because I understand Scottish people fine as it is. I don't know if you mean if I'll ever try to like study Scottish Gaelic, but if you mean just how they speak English, that I don't have a problem with that. So that is easy for me, maybe because Irish and Scottish are pretty close. I really enjoyed my time in Scotland, so yeah, I don't have to give a project to be able to do that. Okay, let's see what else we got. Okay, over on Facebook, Rasmus asked, would you do any adjustment for learning the language for studying at university if they happen to be related, like Norwegian, Danish, Dutch? Yeah, so I don't know, like related to studying at university, but what I do for languages that happen to be related is if I'm pretty strong at one of them, I would try to do something called laddering. I would try to learn the next language through that first one. And if you look on my Instagram recently, you'll see that I showed a picture of a book I was using to reactivate my Dutch, which is very weak, but I did have a mini project in it a long time ago. But the way I did it was not a book in English about how Dutch works. It was a book in German about how Dutch works. Because Dutch is kind of, if you imagine a spectrum, it's kind of like halfway between English and German linguistically. Obviously, that's an oversimplification because it's its own language. It had its own history. But for simple processes, you can think of it as that. And so some parts of it work similarly to German. And because of that, I would rely on my German a lot. And I want to make sure I'm doing things differently when they are different from German. And I found great use out of using a book written in German about learning Dutch. And generally, I use laddering whenever I can. And a lot of the languages I learn, I tend to learn through French, through Assamese courses. So that's kind of what I would say if you wanted to learn similar languages. But again, try to learn one of them first. Try to learn one of them to a very strong level. I think if you're going to try and learn related languages from beginner level at the same time, you're going to run into problems. So that's what I would recommend. Okay, so let's see. Flying Monkey 200 over on YouTube asks, hey Benny, right now I'm trying to learn Spanish and Japanese, and I can't decide which approach I should take to learning. Focusing on one or the other or doing both at the same time. Lots of native Spanish speakers in my city, not so much Japanese. Well, I mean, I know there are definitely people who have had success in learning two languages at once. And just when I say focus, it doesn't mean that you're only focusing on one language for the foreseeable future, for like the next years. You could potentially have a Spanish 3-month project to get your level up 1 or 2 notches. And even if that's not the level you want it to be permanently, like that you would be happy with, you could still be okay with it being there while you put it on pause and then go and learn Japanese intensively for 3 months. Because I think it's a lot easier to do that. And maybe you can like switch between them and get them like up and up and up and up and up. And like while you're doing one language, the other one will go down a little bit, but it probably won't go down all the way to the level it was before. And that way you'll take it up from here and just push that up a notch. So that's kind of what I would recommend, is going between one or the other. But if you can manage it, I could be completely wrong in your situation. Maybe you can do Spanish like one day and Japanese the next day, pushing them all the way up to advanced levels. I personally can't do that, but see what would work for you. But my recommendation is that you try to do one language for a certain amount of time. In terms of approach, my advice for approach is always the same. If you tend to have similar goals to what I would like, which is interacting with people as your priority, and then being able to read the language and understand it on TV as a second priority, not the top priority, but underneath speaking with people, then I would speak as your main focus. Speak from day one. Try it. You'll feel like an idiot. It will definitely not be the easy way to learn the language, but you will very effectively, very quickly push your level up a notch. And then when you get to a level where you're able to have pretty good conversations, but you don't have that consistent, like, confident flow of expressing yourself to a deeper level, then I would take those grammar books and do lots of academic exercises when you're learning the language in that particular way. Okay. If there's lots of native speakers in your city, then that's great. Interact with them for Spanish. But for Japanese, if there aren't, then just learn online. You know, find people via Skype that you can, or whatever your favorite VO over IP tool is, to interact with, and listen to podcasts and all the other things that I'd mentioned previously to learn it digitally. And I've learned a couple of my languages through pure virtual immersion. So you're welcome for answering your question, Flying Monkey 200. Because the Flying Monkey 199, that's normal, that's sane. You're not getting to crazy levels till there are 200 Flying Monkeys, you know? Okay, so let's see what else I can help you with. Diane Case said, Benny, I'm loving your book, Language Hacking Spanish. Thank you. I've learned more in it than 4 semesters of college in Spanish. Wow, I am both very humbled and complimented, and also a little disappointed at what 4 semesters in college Spanish can get you. But keep in mind, like, you can cram a lot of information into a course, but it's how you use that information. I try to get people speaking, and I think that's a way more effective way to get you to truly understand the language. Whereas, like, a course could give you 1,000 times more information, but you're not actually going to learn that if it's not right for you at that time. So I am super glad that my Language Hacking Spanish gave you that boost. Very happy to hear that, Diane. Thanks for letting me know. All right, so flicking through your questions, trying to make sure I get to as many people as I can. I'll be on for another 20 minutes. Once again, if you're catching this late, then very shortly after I'm finished, I'm going to be putting timestamp to all of these questions in the description and in a comment. And otherwise, after this, you guys are welcome to catch me over on Beam. So that's beam.pro/polyglot. Or if you have an Xbox, or if you have the latest update to Windows 10, then you'll actually see a Beam streaming system that you can click from within your operating system, actually. And just search for Polyglot, and you'll see me there. I'm going to be playing Mass Effect Andromeda tonight. Just figured I'd let you guys know about that. You're welcome to come join me. We'll not be answering language learning questions, though. So that's just casual game playing. All right? So anyway, let's see what else I can catch up with here. You guys were talking about Moses. Great guy. I'm a big Moses fan. Okay. And right, Luke Truman asks on YouTube, Benny, I asked earlier, but I forgot to tag you. Well, I don't think it's about tagging here. It's just about the number of questions. Oh, got a lot of blue here behind me. Let me remove that by using an eye drop tool so you guys can see the blue. And then another eye drop. So it kind of goes away. Oh dear. Oh no, my face, my beautiful face. It's ruined. I'm a monster. Okay, nah. Don't think there's much I can do about it. Just going to have to accept that there's going to be a little blue. Alright. I won't be too blue about it. See what I did there? See what I did there? And by the way, I'm wearing these headphones right now because, not because I'm listening to anything, but because I had ear surgery a few days ago. And if I was not wearing them, you would see this ear here flopping out. And I kind of look like Prince Charles, or if you guys know the British comedian Lee Evans, just with like ears coming out. And as a consequence of the surgery, which they told me will go away within a few weeks. I hope so. But until then, I'm going to be self-conscious, and I'm going to be like fashionably wearing headphones, you know. So, French Wolf asks, what languages are you fluently at? I'm going to guess you mean what languages do you speak fluently. I would say where fluently is understood as level B2 and above. I have Spanish, French, Portuguese, Esperanto, German, English, and Italian. I need to do that in alphabetical order in future because I always lose track. But I think those are languages that I would say I speak fluently. I speak some of them at mastery level, but all of them at level B2 and up. And then I have a bunch of other languages that I would have at the A2, B1 level. So yeah, hope that answers your question. Okay. Let's see what other questions I can answer in the last 10 minutes here. I'm glad to see you guys are answering each other's questions some of the time here. Okay. Yeah, Diana replied to French Wolf saying that I'm partial to Spanish from Spain. That is the Spanish that I happen to learn, but I'm a fan of the other Spanishes. I've learned Argentine Spanish, which I think has a lovely musicality to it. Colombian Spanish, which I also found has the kind of boss aspect to it. Did you hear that like pleasant background sounds of New York? It soothes me to sleep, you know. I think that so lovely living in a concrete jungle. Okay, so Brian O'Connor is tuning in from Vancouver. Brian is a friend of mine. Very good to see you here, Brian. Thank you. I'm just making sure I'm saying hi to as many people as I can. But let me get to the next question. And thank you, Holly, for kicking out the spammer here. Whoever this is, please stop making accounts, Mr. Spammer. Okay. All right. So, Young Jay over on YouTube asks, Benny, how can I get people to take the time to talk to me in Spanish? Very good question. Okay, so several ways you can do this. The first and easiest way is to pay them. So let's just get that out of the way first, is you find a teacher who you might actually find for a very good price, especially if they're in Latin America. You might be able to afford that. And if so, great. That's the first thing. Oh dear. So the next thing I would say is to try to see how you can help those people. Sorry, it's very, very hot here, and I had to turn the AC off, otherwise you'd hear it buzzing behind me. So I would recommend that you try to see how can you say things that are interesting to Spanish learners. So in my case, for a lot of the time I was traveling, and I was a beginner level of the language, one thing I had was I had learned how to learn languages. And that in itself made me a slightly more interesting person to talk to, even at the beginner level. Because that would mean that if I met somebody, it wasn't the case for Spanish for me, because it was the first language, but for every other language, if someone said, oh, I want to speak English to you, I want to practice my English, then what I would say back to them, which would still keep their interest, was, well, how about I give you really good tips for how you could learn English and ways you could learn it for free and websites that are very useful. But I give you those tips in Spanish or in Italian or in French. And that way you correct me, but I am making it worth your while because they may never have heard of Anki. They may never have heard of italki. They may never have heard of so many tools that I could help them with. So when I would talk to people as an absolute beginner, I found that conversation point of how I learn languages, which is something that I happen to pick up a skill for and blog about, so I was able to talk about it. So in your case, if you think about what things are you able to talk about that are interesting to people, you know, another one for me personally that I can think of would be my travels. I might be able to tell them about places I visited and how to go there cheap, how to get cheap flights, best kind of little tricks if they said they've always wanted to visit a particular place, and I would try to do that in the target language. So whatever your specialty is, whatever people like talking to you about, try to introduce that in the conversation as a kind of like helping them and giving advice like for free, but in that language, and kind of they will know and they'll be appreciative and they'll actually be a lot more patient. I found that maybe initially some people might have been like, I just want to switch to English with this guy. But once I was giving them these tips that they had never thought about, their eyes kind of widened and they were a lot more patient with my grammatical mistakes and so on. So that's just one other way. Otherwise, another way that I would recommend is to seek out other learners. And for me, again, with my first language, Spanish, I was feeling like there was a period where I was genuinely considering like maybe I should just give up. I'm not getting anywhere with the language. I'm putting in so much work and I still can't speak to people. And the Spaniards in Spain tend to speak very quickly from a beginner's perspective. But I started to speak Spanish with the Erasmus students, so with Italians and French people and Germans, and they would speak slower and they would use simpler words that I would understand. And that way I actually got that ability to truly speak in the language, and I improved my skills from there. And I was very pleased that I was able to have those conversations, but that helped me to get the skills and momentum to be able to have the later conversations with other people. So yeah, those are just a couple of things I would recommend. And then otherwise, if you do find a language exchange, then you are going to be speaking to them in English. You're going to be helping them with their English or whatever your mother tongue is. And then they will help you with your target language. So those are some tips I would recommend for that. All right. So let me try to get through these last bunch of questions for the last 5 minutes here, and I'll try to see if I can get through as many people as possible. But if you want to make sure that you do get your question answered in future, I tend to put the most focus on the questions I see in the first half of these live sessions. So go to YouTube and click the bell button next to the subscribe option. That'll give you a little notification. And the option is also there on Facebook if you choose to get push notifications whenever my Facebook goes live. And all of my other streams, I have the same option. And that way you'll get a notification and you'll be able to be like, oh wow, Benny's going live. Go catch it and join in those first few minutes if you can and ask me your question, and I will very happily be able to answer it. Okay, so Łukasz, if I said that right, from Poland, I presume, asks, what's your favorite language? It's very, very hard, but generally I would say I'm torn between Brazilian Portuguese, not because of how it sounds necessarily as much as how much I love the culture, my memories there, so the language is tied into that. But then also, sometimes I kind of feel like I want to go for sign language. In my case, I happen to have learned American Sign Language. So I'm a big fan of that language. I love how expressive it is. So I'm torn between those two as being my favorite language. Okay. So let's see. Chris Brome followed up on what I said, and great to see you here, Chris. Everyone, go check out Chris's Fluent Language podcast. I look forward to seeing him at the polyglot events this year. He said Tim Donor stepped down his public persona to focus on his academic pursuit in linguistics. That makes sense, and that's why we haven't seen him post as often on his YouTube channel. But I have a feeling when he finishes his degree in linguistics, I'm going to have to make sure that I've done my work to get my subscriber count up before then, because Tim is just going to explode back onto YouTube and he's going to demolish my channel with the skills and the interesting stuff that he's posting. So I'm taking this opportunity while I can before he comes back. And in case you guys are wondering, I am going to be speaking at the Polyglot Gathering in Slovakia in 1 month exactly, or slightly over 1 month. And just search for Polyglot Gathering to check that out. And I'm also going to be speaking at the Langfest in Montreal in August. So if you go to the website for Langfest, if you use the, you can actually use a discount code, I think. Just type Benny, Benny. You'll get a discount if you want to get a ticket to that. And then I'm also going to be at the, I can confirm now, I will be in Iceland for the Polyglot Conference. So I'm doing a hat trick, a triple whammy of polyglot events this year. Okay. So, let's see. Catching up. I'm trying to make sure I'm not missing any other interesting questions here that you guys were sending me. And again, thanks so much for stopping by, everybody. I really appreciate so many people checking this out and asking me these questions, so I can put them all out there. Make sure to click in the description a few minutes after this goes live. I'll make sure it's there, so that people can see what questions they missed. So if you come in halfway through, just come back to this this video. You'll see it on my stream when I'm finished, and you'll be able to see the other questions. And once again, I'm going to be on Beam. Check it on your Xbox, check it on your Windows, search for Polyglot. I'll be there in like an hour or two if you happen to be watching this live. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry I have to flick through the questions in the last half hour. I want to make sure I get to any that jump out at me. Nathan Does Languages asks, will you ever learn Modern Standard Arabic so you can read and write? I don't know if I will, because for me, the whole allure of my experience was interacting with Egyptians. And at the moment, I don't have a need to pursue the higher levels of the language, because you know, there are so many languages in the world. I need to have a cutoff point. While I would love to be C2 level in every language I've ever dabbled in, that's not realistic. It's not practical. So there are some that I just have to decide, okay, spoken level I got to was good. I'm happy with that. And for me, I'm more interested in interacting with the people. So I won't be pursuing Modern Standard Arabic for now, but maybe I'll change my mind in a couple of years. You never know. Okay. Yeah, I'm almost caught up on flicking through the questions you guys have been asking me. Red Rosie says Mass Effect is awesome. Very glad you say that. Okay, what should I do? Daily to learn Japanese. Okay, yeah, interesting question from Shams Sikder on YouTube. He asks, Benny, what should I do daily to learn Japanese, and for how long should I do each thing? I won't talk about Japanese specifically, but how long should I do each thing, and what things should I do is a very interesting question. What I do try to have is a checklist. I have like a to-do list that refreshes daily that I try to tick. It just gives you that little sense of satisfaction that you can tick things off. And personally, I would always have reviewing an Anki deck, creating an Anki deck, something I do at the end of the week. So I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but one of the things I would do daily is definitely have a spoken session. And during that spoken session, you make a note of the words you don't know, but you just write them down very quickly. Then after the spoken session, you put them into an Excel file where you have English or your native language on one side, target language on the second column, I should say. And then you export that such that you can import it to Anki. I'm overdue to make a video explaining exactly how I do that. So I will do that as soon as I can. But you do that as one of the things. So creating an Anki deck, studying it, having your spoken session, maybe looking through the basics of a course that you find interesting, that suits a beginner. You try to see these things that you like doing, but don't try to overwhelm yourself. Try to find the top 5 things and do just those for 1 week. You don't want to do go through 5 different books. You're not going to feel a good sense. Oh, very thirsty there. You're not going to feel a very good sense of achievement from doing that. So try to pick 5 things and spend at least an hour on each thing, because that'll get your momentum up and you'll be able to reach a better level that way. Okay. Brandon asks on YouTube, and I'll just be here for another like maybe 3 or 4 minutes while I try to get through these final questions with everybody. How useful have you found being able to speak Irish in Ireland? I assume even fluent Irish speakers from the gaeltacht would default to English unless they already knew you spoke Irish. That is true. You will not have someone default to Irish outside of the gaeltacht if they bump into you. If you're in the gaeltacht, you may actually, as you're in a pub with somebody or a community town events, something like that, you would expect people would speak Irish, and you're more likely to speak it to somebody even if you've never seen them before. I mean, unless, of course, it's obvious that they're not from there. They have a Bermuda shirt and a giant SLR camera or whatever. But generally, yeah, that would happen. But you do find everyone would speak English. So for me, it's not necessarily about usefulness, because you can usefully get by only in English your entire time in Ireland. For me, it's more about understanding the culture. It's about getting into the history of the language. It's the same reason I try to learn dialects when I go to a country and I really, truly want to get into that country's culture. I would say you want to you want to try to learn local languages if at all possible, if you're truly passionate. In my case, from a cultural and historical perspective, I feel much more enriched that I know the language of my country, and I've had a lot deeper experiences. The first years that I travelled, where I would only be able to speak English, I felt that when I talked about Ireland, I had like a kind of a superficial, just my own experiences way of talking about it. But I feel like now, and it's in huge part thanks to the language, I've gotten to know my own country's culture, and this is like enriched my life in a lot of ways. So that's kind of the interesting part of learning a language like Irish. It's not so much for the usefulness and getting work and so on. Having said that, you can use it to get yourself a job easier. If you check out a video on my channel I did recently with Lindsay from Lindsay Does Languages, we did 9 reasons to learn Irish. So check that out and you might actually get inspired by it being a little more useful than you think. Okay, and let's see. Yeah. Thanks again for all these questions. Okay, yeah, I'm catching up. I'm getting to the very end now. And I think I've answered pretty much all these questions. Yep. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to leave it at that. Yeah, so I think that I've answered as many as I can. I know there were questions where I didn't get to answer today. I'm very sorry about that. But once again, make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you get push notifications by clicking the bell icon in YouTube, or confirming on the settings for my Facebook page that you want to get push notifications. And you'll know as soon as I'm going live. You'll know ahead of time when I schedule it, which I tend to do these days. I let people know maybe a day ahead of time or half a day. And then you can be there at the start. You can ask your question and you'll know for sure that I'm going to answer it. So yeah, definitely make sure that you are subscribed. And otherwise, I hope that I've answered everyone's questions as well as I possibly could. I will be doing more of these later. Deanna says, I missed yours. Sorry, I missed yours. I've answered yours before, Deanna. You know this. I've seen you in my live chats. I've answered your questions. So it's fair. I'm spreading as much of the language encouragement as I can. So yeah, I'm sorry if I missed your questions. Make sure you're subscribed. Come back when I do these later. I will try to do one tomorrow. I'll see if I could do one actually earlier in the day, so people in other parts of the world will be able to catch that. And if I do, I will put that up on my channel, and people who have the push notifications that I keep pushing, see what I did there? You will find out when that's going to be, and you can ask your question. Okay? So yeah, thanks for joining, everybody. And you'll find me playing games tonight on Beam. Once again, search for Polyglot on your Xbox or on Windows 10 if you have the new Creator update, or just go to beam.pro/polyglot. Okay? And I was very happy to answer your questions. I think you're all great. I think you all will do a lot better than you think you will in the languages that you're learning. You will find what you're doing when you try to apply it. A lot of us have a lot of self-doubt. We feel like our level's a lot lower than it is. I'm the same. I constantly, when I'm learning a language, feel like I'm just not ready to do the things I'm doing. But we prove ourselves wrong, which is good when there's that self-doubt involved. So keep that in mind. And I hope some of the things I've been saying today kind of push you in the direction of trying to really use the language you're learning, trying to push yourself up a level and to pursue this passion and to someday speak with other people who are natives of that language, or if you can already do that, to do it to a deeper level if that's your goal. So I hope that I'm doing that for you guys, and I will continue to share these live videos until I have encouraged everyone in the world, which means I'm going to be doing it for a very long time. There's a lot of people to encourage. Yeah. So thanks for watching, everybody, and happy language learning.